but we'll do that here in a little bit. We'll highlight more what Kirby Smart said from his press conference about JT Daniels' injury status. Obviously, Smart will update that more here today. A really good story from Jamari Salyer talking about Bennett. You know, I care what other players think about quarterbacks. The other players in the Georgia roster for a number of years now have seemingly liked Stetson Bennett a lot. That matters to me. I don't think it makes Bennett QB1 necessarily or anything like that. I'm just saying you want your quarterback to be liked by his teammates, and Bennett for a long time clearly has been. Jamari Salyer will give you an example of that. We won't do too much look ahead to South Carolina today, but we'll do some because a couple of important things to point out about that game. Spoiler alert, I think the Dogs are going to be more than ready for the Gamecocks on Saturday. I'm going to talk to you a lot about that as we go through the week. So we're busy. There's a lot of emotion out there, a lot of opinions out there, and a lot of fun. Saturday was a blast. Like, have you seen a better show in Sanford Stadium than what the Dogs put on against UAB in a long, long time? 93,000 people were letting it rip. The fans were great. It was all so good. So let's just unpack it all right now. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We have got a lot to do today. There is a lot to be said about Georgia's win against UAB and the show that the Dogs put on Saturday. I want to begin this way. Now, let me give you a little bit of a warning here that, look, the post-game stuff with Georgia is still on Zoom, and some days that goes well, some days it doesn't. I thought the audio quality that came from those press conferences this weekend was really pretty bad, to be honest with you. And so it's one of those things where, like, the quality of the information is important enough that I'm still going to play some of the audio, but boy, you had to really work to kind of find usable audio, here from this past weekend. So a couple of things you're going to hear on today's show, at least in terms of the audio clip, hopefully not me, but the audio clips are, oh boy, they're a little shaky, and that's not on our end because I have reason to just, believe that's not on our end. It was just recorded in kind of a funky way, especially the stuff with Kirby Smart. But nonetheless, let me begin with the man of the hour, Stetson Bennett, who set a program record on Saturday with 5 touchdown passes and came out of the gates throwing haymakers and swinging and throwing punches and all that kind of stuff. It was a day for the ages for Bennett, literally the kind of thing that one day he can tell his grandkids about. On that field in that stadium, one day I was as good as I ever was. And as I told our video audience that joins us for our 1st and 15 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, you could pick any quarterback in the country. You may could even pick some NFL quarterbacks. And in that first half against UAB, the only thing they could have done was match Stetson Bennett. They couldn't have exceeded the performance that Bennett put together. You could have only been as good as he was. He was averaging 45 yards per attempt for a portion of that first half. His quarterback rating was over 700. He was, I joked with somebody in the press box, he was averaging 4.6 points per throw at one point in time because so many of his throws were going for touchdowns. It was that kind of day. And after the game, he was asked to kind of put into context what does this all mean. And, Bennett was both obviously proud of his efforts, but also keeping it within context. And I think this is pretty good stuff from Bennett from Saturday. Take a listen to this.
It seems like that's usually an Oklahoma stat line when they play some, north, south, west Texas. Whoever's the guy, we're all ready, all of us. I think everybody on the team has confidence with everybody in our quarterback room. And, we're all good friends. We all prepare the same way. You knew you were going to get that answer.
So in other words, the question was along the lines of, hey, do you think you might be the starting quarterback now that you threw 5 touchdowns? And he's like, nah, listen, it was a great day. And, Bennett is like, I think a lot of people have this like assumption that because Bennett's a little smaller than you sometimes think quarterbacks would be, and that he, kind of went from like sort of walk-on status or, scout team status to, starting quarterback. I think some people have this assumption that Bennett's this like golly gee whiz, somebody like that who's like excessively humble or excessively, aw shucks, I'm just glad to be here. That's not quite the vibe I get from Bennett. I think Bennett's got a little more edge to him than some people realize. And so upon getting a chance to answer that, he was going to let you know, listen, I put an Oklahoma stat line out there. I don't know if y'all were watching, but I put an Oklahoma stat line out there. But then he obviously takes it back to the team thing of, listen, all of our quarterbacks are good. Everybody's preparing. Everybody's doing what they need to be doing. But don't assume, though, that Bennett doesn't have an edge to him just because his story is a little bit of an underdog-style story. Don't be so quick to assume that. But what some people are kind of left to wonder is, well, what does all of this mean? When Bennett plays that well, when some people thought Carson Beck should start or might start, and we'll get more into this later on, but Beck didn't start, didn't get a chance to play. Bennett plays as well as he does. What does all of this mean? I'm going to spend like 60 seconds on this, and then I want to talk about a couple of other things. I guess I've kind of come to the appreciation that it might not mean all that much. Let me say it this way. So, like, I'm not someone who has watched a lot of, the Marvel movies, the Avengers, stuff like that. I haven't really watched that many of those. Now, I'm not against them. Like, fun entertainment's fine for me. I love Star Wars, for instance. I just never really watched the Marvel movies all that much. It's not like everything I'm watching is like French with subtitles. I'm happy to have entertaining, action, movies. Just the Marvel movies themselves, I don't know that much about. So for someone who doesn't know, much about the stories of these movies, but obviously you can't be alive on this planet and not be aware they exist because of all the attention they get, the money they make. Some of the stuff that I hear sometimes kind of confusing. Like there was like this new Captain America movie the other day, and like there's this new guy playing Captain America, but I thought this other guy played Captain America. When you ask somebody about that, wait, which one is Captain America, this guy or the other guy? The same answer you kind of always get is, well, this is just part of the multiverse. Like the so-called multiverse is supposed to be like this, I guess, alternate universe that exists apart from the established reality. And all the weird stuff that happens in Marvel can typically be explained of, well, this is just sort of part of the multiverse. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I don't watch the movies on a regular basis. But I am kind of the belief that Saturday's game for Georgia was Georgia football's own version of the multiverse. It's sort of like this weird one-off that's not necessarily connected to established canon. The reality-based storyline is JT Daniels the starting quarterback, and frankly, the Georgia offense is trying to figure some things out, and the Georgia offense is trying to find out how explosive it can be. But on Saturday, we had this like multiverse day where not only is Stetson Bennett the starting quarterback for Georgia, but the Georgia offense was as explosive as any team in America. And I don't really know what it means. It probably doesn't really mean anything. It's just sort of this separate reality to be enjoyed as what it was. Just kind of an entertaining show. And I'm sort of fine with that it's not necessarily connected to the larger narrative of Georgia. It's just a thing that happened. And it was entertaining. And as you start moving forward the rest of the way, we'll kind of get back into the more established storyline. And we'll find out how explosive Georgia can be in the biggest games it's going to play this season, hopefully with a healthy JT Daniels at quarterback. But on Saturday, the multiverse version of Georgia football was quite a show indeed from Stetson Bennett, and I'm going to give him a lot of credit for the way that he played because stepping onto the field, having not practiced very much apparently with the number one offense and playing that well is really pretty remarkable. So a great day from Bennett, an entertaining show from fans, and I think it's important we don't really make much more of it than that. It was just a good day to be in Sanford Stadium, especially if your last name was Bennett on all of that. Now, let me move on to something that I think does really matter. And this is what was to me a frustration for Georgia fans in the 48 hours or so leading up to the game. There was this fixation on who was going to start at Georgia, whether it be, Beck to begin with. A lot of Georgia fans were excited about that because, he's a four-star and, a lot of folks just want to see what he brought to the table. They hadn't seen as much of him as they had seen some of these other quarterbacks. And, there was then it may be Stetson Bennett. That created some confusion on the part of some Georgia fans. But along the way with all of this, whether it's thinking about Bennett or thinking about Beck, the one thing I really don't think Georgia fans have thought enough about is what is actually going on with JT Daniels? How healthy is he really? This is the most important story right now going on with Georgia football. And I have no reason to believe that he's more injured than Kirby Smart has let on for him to be. But honesty compels me to admit, how many injuries in a row is it for Georgia that have been first described as no big deal, and then later additional reporting lets us know that actually maybe 5 weeks? I mean, and I'm not saying that's going to happen for JT Daniels, but I think as a Georgia fan, you have to be on guard with what's happening with your starting quarterback. This matters more than the Bennett-Beck drama. This matters more than almost anything else. How healthy is JT Daniels? Because I can promise you this. It was not part of some grand diabolical master plan to have Daniels not starting in the second game of the season against UAB on Saturday in what would have only been his sixth start in a Georgia uniform. This is a young man that went almost the entirety of 2019 and 2020 without playing hardly any football at all. This is a guy who came back to Georgia to play football. He wanted to play Saturday. Georgia would have wanted him to play Saturday. The fact that he didn't is not an insignificant story. So as I think for myself about, my own preparations going into the South Carolina game on Saturday, there's going to be nothing that matters more for me than how healthy Daniels is or isn't going into a game like this. And for a Georgia offense that needs to get better, with its full complement of guys, some of that is put on hold if you're not doing that with the guy that you presume to be your starting quarterback in JT Daniels. So with all of that in mind, this is smart from Saturday on JT Daniels. Now, I told you before, this audio quality is lousy, but it's also smart talking about why his quarterback didn't start, so it's valuable enough to hear, assuming you can hear it. Let's give it a shot.
JT got better as the week went on. Really didn't even know anything was really wrong with him on Monday. He took most reps and was fine. It was bothering him some. And as the week went on Tuesday, it bothered him a little more. And today he was better than he was earlier in the week and actually felt good. And today was the first time he got to really throw some balls down the field in warm-ups. So we hope he continues to improve.
I'm telling you right now, you got to start really thinking more about this and really listening closely to everything that Smart says and everything that happens for Georgia here. And we talked about this last week, that my reasonable goal for the Georgia offense was to really be humming by October the 9th on the road at Auburn. To Mike Griffith's credit, he came on the show and said, well, BA, don't forget about October 2nd versus Arkansas. That statement seems more relevant now. Arkansas looked really good in beating up on Texas on Saturday. That's a game that matters. It's a game that I was in. I'll give you my mindset real quick for the Arkansas-Texas game. I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I love Sam Pittman. Love seeing them beat up on Texas. This is a blast. This is good times. Game's over. Wait a second. This team's playing Georgia in a couple of weeks. They look pretty good. Oh, boy, let's figure out what's going on here. The Arkansas-Georgia game on October 2nd seems like a bigger deal now. You want a healthy JT Daniels in rhythm and in sync with his offense when you play that game. Not so much because Arkansas may beat Georgia, but the game seems tougher now than it may have seemed to some people on paper before Arkansas, walked the dog with Texas all day on Saturday. Then there's October 9th at Auburn. There's a chance Auburn's not very good, but y'all, they are also one of the teams involved in the game on Saturday that ESPN College Game Day is attending. They got a high-profile spot on the road against Penn State. Road game at LSU after that. There's a chance that Auburn's ranked in the top 15 and undefeated with a rocking and rolling crowd there at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Georgia goes there October 9th. You want JT Daniels ready to go for that game by the time it takes place. So here's the point that I'm making here. I'm not a doctor, won't pretend to be. I don't know how healthy JT Daniels is. The fact that Smart's downplaying the nature of his injury actually doesn't mean that much to me, given the way that Smart typically speaks about a lot of these injuries. One way or another, it's our own eyewitness observation of this. It's going to probably matter more. That you need Daniels to get healthy, and you need this offense to make sure it's fully in sync and fully in rhythm as you start looking to the month of October. The Dogs are going to play some big games in that month. It's going to be a cakewalk for a couple of weeks here, but the cakewalk probably ends once you put your pumpkins out for Halloween, once October comes around here. So the Daniels health is definitely a story worth watching. It was an entertaining show on Saturday, and I was glad to see Stetson Bennett do what he did. But apart from that, I'm watching the Daniels situation close, and frankly, I'm not quite so sure what to make of this just yet. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Good to have you with us on all the video platforms today. We start at 9:45 at DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app. Then at 10 a.m. we get going on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Is that all the platforms? I think it is. Podcast, the Apple Player, Spotify, the Google Player for the Android folks. Obviously, the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Some of you listen right there through SoundCloud. Some of you say, BA, I wait for you to post the show there at DawgNation.com. That does come a couple of hours after it appears on some of the other platforms, but if that's convenient for you, we just want you to have the show however you get it, and we want to say thank you to you for being a big part of what we do here each and every day. And all of this platforms and all of our ability to distribute this, all made possible as well by our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They are there to take care of you when it comes to energy-efficient windows and doors. That means times like this when the weather's hot, it keeps the outside where it's supposed to be on the outside and all that cool air on the inside that makes you feel so nice and comfortable in your home. That's right where it's supposed to be, making you feel really good there too. And Pella is also a nationally known company, so when they install those windows and doors, you're getting the unparalleled resources that a nationally known company can provide, but locally owned branch right here in Georgia, which means you're really getting unrivaled service. That's all what Pella Window and Door of Georgia can do for you. Also, for a couple more days, take advantage of great savings here between now and September 16th. Replace all your windows. Payments as low as $99 a month, or you can get 10% off qualifying installations. A couple different ways to do this. Give them a call, 678-638-1496. One more time, that number, 678-638-1496, or visit PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Tell them BA from DawgNation Daily told you they would take good care of you, because I know for a fact that's going to be the case. And here on our show today, we're going to try to take good care of you. I've got more good stuff on Stetson Bennett before we're done today, including some really fascinating appraisal of Bennett's role on this Georgia team from one of the Dogs' key leaders, Jamari Salyer. We'll do that on the program. We'll also get serious about the situation with the Georgia offensive line, kind of what you're seeing from that group right now. No better person to break that down for us than John Stinchcomb. And we'll celebrate the emergence of Brock Bowers as a legit playmaker. This is not a drill, folks. After being targeted a ton in the Clemson game and really showing out on Saturday, this Bowers situation is looking pretty interesting right now. So all of that is coming up in just a moment. Now, before that, let's go around the doghouse here today, assisted by our friends at AAA. And by the way, stay tuned for the end of the show for our Golden Shoe. We have a AAA-themed Golden Shoe, which I thought was really funny. We have a couple of Golden Shoes today. That was one of them. We'll do that then. But for now, Around the Doghouse, presented by AAA here today, let me get into what was really the dominant discussion on our post-game show on Saturday, presented by the UGA Bookstore at the UGA Bookstore. The post-game show is a little different than a lot of what we do around here in that I mostly just read comments. I share a few thoughts of my own, but this is like the old school radio show. Remember the old school radio show where, like, after the game, people are like calling in and they're giving their feelings. It's kind of like just it's fan reaction to what happens. And that's kind of the model for the post-game show. This is 2021, so it's not necessarily phone calls anymore. It's reading those comments and all the different video platforms that kind of show up there. But that's, kind of, what we do there on that. So a lot of what I do in the post-game show is reacting to what other people are saying. And the thing that everybody was kind of talking about on Saturday was, this is true before the game, it was still true after the game, why it was Bennett that started instead of Carson Beck, who Kirby Smart had, suggested, probably more than suggested, had said was the number 2 quarterback prior to the JT Daniels injury. Why was it then that Carson Beck didn't start? Why did Stetson Bennett start in his place? And some people got really nervous here because they want to see Beck. He's a former 4-star, a higher-rated player in their mind than Stetson Bennett is. And with the transfer portal always looming, there was this, suggestion on the part of a lot of fans, well, I guess Beck's about to bolt if he's not getting this chance to start right now. So I've got a lot of feelings on this, and I'll share them with you. But first, let me let you hear Smart in his own words. Not perfect audio once again, but Smart in his own words explaining why it was Bennett instead of Beck that got the start on Saturday. Here is Kirby.
The decision to go with Stetson, we're really young offensively. We have a lot of guys that are injured and out, whether it's Kieras, George, Darnell. We just have a lot of young players that we're trying to grow up, and we felt that it would give us a calming effect to have him in, his experience, his ability to play in games. And he played really well, and really proud of the way he handled it. And the plan was to play both of them. And we went 2-1, exactly like we planned on to get those guys reps. I'm really proud of the way Stetson's handled himself. Nobody's been better to the University of Georgia than Stetson Bennett in terms of his work. And he doesn't get, as many reps as a lot of other guys. So I was proud of him and his success today.
Playing in a game when it's 0-0 is a very different thing than playing in a game when it's 14 or 21-0 or 28-0 or something like that. The pressure is just different. Bennett has been a starter for Georgia before. Kirby Smart and Georgia had respect for UAB. Now, you can roll your eyes at that, but the fact of the matter is that the team that beat Florida State on Saturday, Jacksonville State, got beat by UAB 31-0. Comparative scores can be a trap to fall into, transitive property, all that kind of stuff, but it's still a data point worth considering that UAB shut out a team that proved capable of beating Florida State on the road. Georgia at kickoff on Saturday was only about a 23-point favorite. You don't have to care about gambling. You don't have to care about point spreads. But as a anticipated outcome, Georgia was only expected to beat UAB by about 23 points. They are more than a 30-point favorite by comparison against South Carolina for this upcoming weekend. There are reasons to believe that UAB is better than South Carolina. Georgia treated them as doing so. Some Georgia fans are going to say, well, this is just Kirby Smart being careful, being conservative. This is just Kirby Smart, playing games with his quarterback position. I've criticized Smart for quarterback stuff before. I think there's some specific real examples you can cite where maybe Smart did not make the best decision, or he at least made an odd decision when it comes to quarterbacks in some respects. I simply don't think this is one of those. And this is not Georgia host carrying Kirby Smart's water. I'm sensitive to the idea of that because my real constituency is the fans. I try to take care of fans. Kirby Smart doesn't sign my checks. It's not my job to prop him up. His own performance is enough to do that for him. In this particular case, my job is to narrate a discussion amongst Georgia fans. I understand where Georgia fans are coming from when they call for Beck. I just happen to think in this particular case they might be wrong. In fact, it's more than a might be. I think they are wrong. This notion that Beck's waited long enough to start because it's the second game of his second year on campus. Tell that to Latavius Brini, who was a part of the 2017 signing class and is only just now getting a chance to play significant football for UGA. Or Channing Tindall, who was – how highly rated was Channing Tindall as part of the 2018 class? And how long did he wait to get to do some of the things that he's doing right now? The idea that somehow Beck – should have to be less patient than some other Georgia players have had to be in terms of getting on the football for Georgia, that simply doesn't make any sense to me. And the thing that concerns me right now is what Georgia's doing in 2021 to prepare itself for a national championship. Now, I don't know that playing Stetson Bennett got you any closer to that on Saturday because we presume that JT Daniels is the starter. When healthy, we hope to see Daniels do some of the things that Bennett did on Saturday. But the idea that the UAB game was some G-Day Part 2 audition to see if Beck was worthy of being the starting quarterback in 2022, I can promise you this, that's not the way that you want Kirby Smart to make decisions. And this notion of, well, you better play him, otherwise he may transfer. I realize that narrative was out there, but trust me, you don't want your coach to coach in fear of the transfer portal either. And frankly, I don't think some of you are giving Beck enough credit to assume that he's somehow going to be, pouting and impatient if he has to wait a little longer to get a start there at Georgia. If that's the way that he felt, then he probably would have made a different decision than coming to Georgia to begin with. I haven't talked to Carson about that. I don't know that for sure. That's just the assumption I'm going to make, that you know what you're signing up for when you come to a place like Georgia. And when it was all said and done, Beck got a chance to play plenty on Saturday. For those that wanted to see the former four-star get some game reps, he got them. But on the basis of the way that both quarterbacks played, can you honestly say Smart made the wrong decision by playing Bennett instead of Beck? That's not a criticism of Beck. It's just an acknowledgement of the reality of the situation. So I realize this is a hot topic. But don't let this distract you from what really matters. Getting JT Daniels back healthy and enjoying on Saturday from Stetson Bennett was actually kind of a performance from the ages. That is Around the Doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA. And, of course, I'm on the road a lot this time of year. High school football games, Athens on Saturday, road games back when they come back around again here in a couple of weeks. And, obviously, I'm thankful to have a AAA membership because if the car breaks down, goodness knows I'm not going to fix it there on the side of the road. So AAA really helps me when it comes to that. But that's not the only way they can help you. They can also help you big time when it comes to your auto insurance. Because when you switch and save with AAA, you can save, on average, $529. That's real money, extra money in your pocket for having AAA as your auto insurance provider. So find out more about this, AAA.com/auto insurance for more information. That's AAA.com/auto insurance for more information on all of that. So we'll obviously give Georgia fans a chance to weigh in and react to what they saw on Saturday. We'll do that comment section and video later on, or on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and we'll tell you more about what Georgia players themselves were saying with the day from Bennett before we're done on today's show too. But we want to now make way for our expert analyst to come on here, talk about what he saw from the Georgia offensive line quietly in the midst of a day in which the Georgia passing attack was really pretty impressive. The Georgia running game may have left something to be desired, and maybe the offensive line a part of that story too. John knows all about that, so we'll let him tell us as we get a classic City Lager Insider Update with John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily. Fun Monday continues right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to John Stinchcomb right now. Classic City Lager insider update after Georgia just absolutely blast UAB on Saturday. I didn't see that one coming. Georgia winning, obviously, but 56-7 against a team that I really have a lot of respect for in the Blazers. Bill Clark, I think, one of the sharp group of 5 coaches out there. This was really a flex from Georgia, I thought, especially without your starting quarterback there in the game. John, it was also interesting for the build-up to it, and I kind of joked with somebody on Friday that, boy, the Clemson game just seemed like 100 years ago because after you beat, this kind of top 5 national championship level nemesis, the ecstatic high from that lasted about 12 minutes before we were debating who should be starting at quarterback and what's going on with this and, what's going on with that. It is always interesting times when it comes to talking about Georgia football on a week-to-week basis. So, John, I guess just start wherever you want to.
You just toss the ball up, and I appreciate that, B.A. You know what? When we left the Clemson game, I think fans for both teams still had so many questions. Is Clemson not the same team? Did we beat a good Clemson team but not a great Clemson team? Is Georgia's offense able to move the ball, or is Clemson's defense good? What's the story there? And I think we got some answers. I think we figured out against a UAB team that you look at their history, their track record, and they've had some really good success in their conference. So not your usual cupcake. And Georgia came out having to continue to build an identity and do so behind a quarterback that was not your name starter, not the guy that folks have entered this season with such hype and anticipation for. And they performed at an exceptionally high level against a good, not great, opponent and made them look, very inferior. So it for me solidified the legitimacy of Georgia being the number 2 team in the country. And also you have to pay attention to what's going on in Clemson and say they're a very capable and great national team, and it makes that week 1 victory look that much sweeter for us.
Yeah.
So I think it answered a lot of questions.
Let me do 2 quick things on the quarterback, then I want to move on here a little bit. I think some fans totally overblown, whatever the right verb tense is on that, made way too much of the decision not to start Beck. What do you think about that?
Well, we don't get to watch the practice.
Yeah.
And if anything, I think it caught fans off guard because of the gamesmanship that was coming out of Athens and particularly Coach Smart and his staff. And the questions leading up to it all pointed towards if JT can't go, then it's going to be Carson Beck. So I think the shock aspect of Stetson being the first number that's called, fans were almost offended. Like, well, why have we been kept in the dark for this team that I have such loyalty and love for, and we are so excited about what this season can hold for us? Then why am I not some scholar of all things Georgia football? And I think there's some validity to that. I know in text threads and text groups that I'm with and involved with former Georgia players, nobody really knew, and so it did come as a surprise. Now, what a great surprise it was, because Stetson came out there and smoked them. I mean,
yeah.
You talk about a guy who played at a really high level, and the moment was most certainly none too big for him. He set the bar pretty high, not only for Carson, but I think JT was out there going, man, I'd like to have some of those opportunities as well.
I think that's interesting. In the case of Daniels, John, I told our audiences before, and this is not me trying to be doom and gloom because I don't have the medical expertise to say that one way or another, but my antenna is very up on the Daniels situation right now, that him not playing on Saturday was not, to me, an insignificant story. And whatever Smart says, he'll do a weekly press conference here today. And as the week progresses, not that Georgia necessarily needs him for South Carolina, because I think the Gamecocks are obviously an overmatched team you would think on Saturday. But the Arkansas game on October 2nd seems like a bigger deal now that the Arkansas has beaten Texas. And the road trip to Auburn, that's always a big deal for Georgia. Those are games in which not only do you want Daniels to be healthy, but you want Daniels to be in sync and in rhythm with the playmakers that he has available to him there at the time. I'm not trying to paint a dire picture because there's a chance that Daniels is healthy right now. But until I get full confirmation of that, I'm kind of on eggshells about my starting quarterback's health a little bit right now. What do you think?
Well, I think it's kind of the MO of Georgia that they have confidence in the depth across so many positions. I look at past experiences, past position groups where a guy's coming back from injury and you think, well, man, he's probably 90%. And because of the depth, because of the development and recruitment and quality of players that Georgia continues to have across the board, I think it gives them a little more confidence to say, we're not pressed to put a guy out there that there's some level of concern of whether or not he's going to be able to give his best. And I think that's a testament for Georgia that it's not, man, we're reliant on this one guy because there's such a steep cliff if he's not on the field. I still think that JT Daniels, a healthy JT Daniels, is by far the best option for Georgia.
Yeah.
But when you have the confidence in, obviously this week it was Stetson and a little combination with Beck, that you can get the job done and perform well and give your number one guy the opportunity to heal and not press, I think that's an encouraging sign. I would be more concerned about JT Daniels' health if he wasn't practicing, if he wasn't throwing balls. My understanding, very limited understanding of what this injury is and probably is, it can be nagging. It's one of those that I don't think it's going to be a season ender by any means, but it can certainly be a situation that would hinder and just nag for an extended period of time, just linger on. So if you got an opportunity where you feel pretty confident in what you got and you can give a guy some time to let one of these not get re-aggravated and flare up, I think they were wise in assessing the situation and feeling confident that you can give him the opportunity to heal a little bit.
So let me move on to a different topic here for a moment. Let me be as candid as I possibly can be. I feel like my audience has been out in front of something ahead of me, and maybe I'm only just now catching up. And that is, maybe there are some concerns with this Georgia offensive line right now, more so than I've maybe discussed. I'm not saying it's a bad unit or anything like that. I'm just saying that, this Georgia rushing attack right now is not the Georgia rushing attack we're used to seeing. Now, on Saturday, you didn't really need it because you were the air raid offense of, David Klingler and Andre Ware. So you didn't necessarily have to be great running the football on Saturday, but Georgia wasn't great running the football on Saturday. And Smart talked about the need to kind of get that push. Interior of the offensive line seems to get some questions about that. A lot of this, Tate Ratledge did get hurt. Warren Erickson's playing a different position than he was supposed to be playing at the beginning of the season, and he's got a hand wrapped as he's doing that, which, maybe that affects his play, maybe it doesn't. The point is that I think that some of the people who communicate with me that watch or listen to the show and have been raising this as a concern, I think they may have been more right than I was initially letting on with this. You obviously watch this position group in a way that I can't because of the way that you played the game. So, John, what do you think you're seeing from the Georgia offensive line here at the moment?
I think you're still seeing transition. I think you're seeing guys trying to build chemistry, and I think it's an overall scheme transition as well. I think we're trying to figure out what our guys, and that specifically I'm talking about our front five, what they excel at, what we can really highlight for them. And you lose Tate Ratledge in week one. You're still trying to figure out exactly where guys are and which guys you want in a particular position, because even Jamari's taking reps at a variety of spots. So my level of concern is there. There is a level of concern, but it's not nearly as high as some of the fans, I've seen some of these comments, and you're going, well, we did score 56 against a good opponent. We were able to air it out, and I think a lot of that had to do with what UAB was presenting. I think they came into the game saying, we've got to stop this stable of backs, and they moved the front well. And, yes, you still have to be able to run against some difficult looks, but that defense was presenting opportunities in one-on-one situations on the back end, and Georgia exploited them. So, yes, in an ideal world, you're wanting to be able to run it against every look and throw it against every, and that didn't happen. There is a level of comfort that I have with that, with the understanding that yes, the run game is what it needs to be, and I think it's a work in progress. But I certainly think we can get there. I'm not firing any alarms off here about the abilities of this group. I will say it's probably not what it's been in years past with some of the elite groups, but it's developing, and I think there's great potential still to be had.
It's John Stinchcomb here. It's a Classic City Lager Insider Update, and, of course, Classic City Lager, a great choice for you as you're heading towards game day because it's a lighter lager-style beer. That means it's easy to drink, tastes good when the weather's nice like it was this weekend, but there's no sacrifice in flavor because you're still talking about a craft beer-style lager. So there's a lot of work that goes into the flavor and making sure that it's a real special experience. That's what Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company, that's what it's known for. It's available in 6 and 12-pack cans all year long wherever you're shopping. So it's easy to find. It tastes great. It's like a taste of Athens wherever you might be. Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company is just good cold beer. John, it's okay if the answer to this question is no, but did you get a chance to watch closely when like Broderick Jones or Marius Mims, the two young tackles, were in the game? Because I think some people say, well, if one of those younger guys can emerge, now Salyer can be a guard again, and maybe that's the best version of the Georgia offensive line. But obviously the big if there is one of those young guys being ready to start. Presumably it seems like right now Jones may be a little closer to doing that than Mims might be. Did you get a chance to really examine them under a microscope with the way they played on Saturday?
Well, yes, I watched the game. I always tend to stare at the offensive line and see what we've got going, especially with these young guys and the anticipation thereof, which, at one point that might have been the biggest right side of an offensive line that we've seen in quite some time, probably since the Isaiah Wilson days, when you got Mims at right tackle and Xavier Truss at right guard and Fitzpatrick as tight end. That's a pretty formidable wall, 6'7" plus across the board. So, big guys, and I, of what I've seen, and I didn't break down the film. I'm just watching, and luckily I had recorded it and can rewind it. It's a little different than watching coach's film. I do think Broderick is further along in his development and probably would be the next man up. And some of the other guys, man, you can see the potential there. I mean, Mims is, when you watched his high school film, the first thing that jumped off at you that he was huge, and you think, well, maybe it's the competition. It most certainly isn't. I mean, out there next to Truss, those are two monster humans, and you see the potential there. Now, more than anything, it's the details of the game and just placement and understanding how to put yourself in a good position. They're all athletes. They all move well. They all finish. I think it's the details. I think it's the details of understanding where your protection help is in pass game and what you're vulnerable to and what you need to eliminate quickly in the run game. And that just takes time. And, for Mims, he looks like a younger guy that's got a lot of skill, but just not there yet. And Broderick seems a little bit closer, but, there was similar situations that appeared in that game. So I think the assessment of Broderick being closest to being ready to help, and would you feel comfortable if his number was called right now? Probably so. But there's still development across the board. They're young guys.
Let me get ready to finish with this. We've now seen 2 games from Georgia. You have something to compare them to with the rest of the country there, too. I'm curious what else jumps out at you here. I mean, for me, maybe the most interesting thing is right now Georgia looks like it has a real budding playmaker in Brock Bowers. Targeted a ton in the game against Clemson. Really showed you an unbelievable level of array of athleticism against UAB. The Bowers thing is fascinating to me. Anything else along those lines that you just feel like is really important that we take stock of now that we've seen Georgia a couple of times?
Well, yes, I think Bowers is no longer a well-kept freshman secret. I mean, the guy is a playmaker and was featured early and often in the Clemson game, and you saw his playmaking ability on full display against UAB. So I think he's somebody that defenses are going to start paying much more attention to and trying to eliminate those opportunities, having recognized for 2 straight weeks Georgia has highlighted him and found various ways to use him. And, mostly out of the slot, like a really large and fast slot receiver, which, as you get Darnell Washington back out there, you got to think about how many different exciting ways Georgia can use that 1-2 punch at tight end. Totally different players, but man, matchup nightmares in so many different ways. Focus is on that defensive side of the ball. I just think if we're talking about the Georgia run game, some of the things that you saw later in the game with the run defense, there were some little creases there, and you just, to me, it highlights the difference that Jordan Davis makes on that front. When he is out there, that group is just a totally different unit, and if anything, you're just thinking from the UAB game in that 2022 season, how do you replace a guy like that? But makes you really grateful this season to have such a game changer and game influencer like Jordan Davis across the front because, man, he just eats 2-3 gaps up at a time and hard to run against. So real big difference maker for Georgia.
I don't want to keep you too long, and I apologize for squeezing this in. It's kind of a weird thing to even ask, but on Saturday at halftime, they honored the 1980 national championship team, John, and there were like, by my count, nearly 90 people there, obviously players and coaches, and you're a guy, and, listen, I obviously have great fondness for your final team. They're the 2002 SEC champions, but my point in asking this is, as somebody who also tries to keep up with your former teammates and kind of, I'm sure y'all have had moments when you've kind of gotten together either in official or unofficial capacity, how cool is it that for 40 years and guys probably spread out all over the country and obviously maybe just different things going on, to get that many people back on the same place in the same day. Obviously, Coach Dooley looked really, good and great to see him there too on Saturday. Not the easiest thing in the world to get that many people back from a team to Athens on the same day after 40 years. I thought it was a pretty cool thing, and I'm sure as someone who's probably had to organize some of these get-togethers over the years, I'm sure you could tell us that's probably not quite as easy as it maybe necessarily looked.
Absolutely not. But I will say, when you do something as special as win a national championship and raise the banner for a program that, golly, we've been chomping at the bit for how many years? 40, I guess. To do it again, it creates a very special bond. I mean, the Super Bowl team for New Orleans, we had our 10-year reunion, I guess it was a year or so ago, right before the pandemic, and you get good returns on those deals because it's such a special bond. You shared that moment with folks, and I think it's a lot easier to get people together to celebrate something as unique and special as that, especially in a year where there's such promise for Georgia that this might be their opportunity to create that group like we've had 40 years ago. So it's always fun to highlight those guys, isn't it? I mean, what an amazing group, and just to see and listen to all the names that they were able to call out, and all the memories for us Georgia fans who grew up with the Lindsey Scotts and the Buck Bellew stories for all those years. It's always fun to go back and highlight that special team.
No, you're absolutely right about that. John, good stuff. Thanks for being here as part of a Classic City Logger Insider Update. Appreciate your thoughts on all of that, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again next week as well.
It was a great win for the Dogs.
Yes,
Want
it
to watch
was.
another one coming up against an SEC opponent this weekend.
No doubt about that, John. Thanks for your time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me do a couple of kind of wrap-ups on what John had to say there, because I was kind of monitoring some of the comments a little bit as John was on, and I saw one or two people bring up the idea of, well, it was wrong that Georgia fans booed Stetson Bennett. You know, I was in the stadium when Bennett was announced as the starter. I didn't hear any boos. I know there's been like a little bit of online chatter about that or something. All I can say is that from my perspective, that was not my experience. I did not hear any boos of Bennett. Now, I talked to plenty of Georgia fans before the game that wanted Beck, not Bennett, to start. But the idea that Bennett was received by boos from the home crowd as someone who was in the stadium when that happened, that's not what I experienced. Now, maybe these headphones and my loud mouth, maybe my hearing's not what it once was, but I was in the stadium, and I think that to the extent that's been kind of projected online, that's not the experience that I got from being in the stadium. That's just kind of my thing on that. And the one thing that John brought up there, which I think is kind of interesting, that some Georgia fans have kind of highlighted as their issue with Bennett not Beck on Saturday was, we were told that Carson Beck was the number 2 quarterback. And here's the thing where I think that reasonable people can disagree, and maybe some of the former Georgia players that John talked to felt this way. I know some of you felt this way. Look, I think there's a very big difference between being the number 2 quarterback but behind a healthy starter and the guy that then steps into the starting role once the starter is no longer available. It's just a much, much bigger deal. And, working with the number 2 offense during practice as a way of preparing and growing and learning, especially with, Stetson Bennett having done what he's done in the past, that's one thing. But when the starting quarterback's not available, it's not necessarily an obvious, this is what's going to step up and this is what's going to happen, because this is one of those things where the college depth chart's way different than the pro depth chart anyway. Like in the NFL, the depth chart thing kind of matters, right? Because on game day, barring injury, the third quarterback's not active. So who's ranked where in the depth chart in the NFL matters because of the way the NFL rule book is organized. In college, it's a lot more of a ceremonial designation. So this idea that, well, Smart said that Beck was number 2, but then he started Stetson Bennett. I think those are very, very different things all the way around there. We'll do our SEC through here in a moment. Let me first shout out a very fun thing ongoing right now at your local Marlowe's Tavern, the one closest to you in your neighborhood. Ribs and Whiskey is back. Now listen, if you want to get my attention perked up more than anything else as quickly as possible, mention either ribs or whiskey. Mention ribs and whiskey together, and you have me at hello. I can promise you that. And listen, this is one of my favorite things that Marlowe's does each and every year. My wife, who frankly feels like I haven't taken her out to dinner enough since football season has started, is on me big time to get over to the tavern closest to us and enjoy some of this ribs and whiskey. So I will be doing that very soon, whether I want to or not. But the good news is I really do want to, because it's both the barbecue options that are available during this time of year, special new menu items there as well. Plus, you get a couple different sauces and glazes you can put on there. It's the Jack Daniel's glaze. There's the Carolina mustard. Some really good stuff. The honey bread bourbon pudding is a special dessert that they have during this time of year. All really good stuff. It's only for a limited time, so you got to make sure you get it while it lasts. You can also order this online. It can be a part of your tailgate. You can get it to go. Some people still enjoy getting their food to go right now. Marlowe's can get you hooked up on all of that there as well. Just enjoy some ribs and whiskey at your local Marlowe's Tavern as this fun event kind of goes on through the fall here. That's just one of the most fun things that Marlowe's does all throughout the year. All right, let's do a few SEC through stories here just for a moment there as well. Last night, South Carolina coach Shane Beamer did speak. He does kind of a Sunday teleconference. Mark Richt used to do one of these. Most SEC coaches don't really do these anymore. South Carolina still does. And the thing that Beamer brought up on the heels of South Carolina winning kind of a hard-fought game against East Carolina is the current health of quarterback Luke Doty. Doty, I think, is kind of a better than some people realize, kind of maybe slightly above average quarterback by SEC standards. Of course, Zeb Nolan, who's had kind of an interesting story, ties to the state of Georgia, really the Athens area, goes from being a quarterback at North Dakota State to being a graduate assistant at South Carolina, thrust into an active duty role on the Gamecocks roster once the Doty injury happened. And by the way, Doty, another one of these kind of foot injuries, much the same way that the Georgia's dealt with a few of these. The point, though, is that when Doty's healthy, he's going to be the quarterback. Beamer is hinting that could be for this Saturday against South Carolina, against Georgia. Now, there's also a degree of logic that would dictate they're a 30-something point underdog. Doty's health would be pivotal for the games they have a chance to win later on. You're really bringing him back for this game when you could hold him for another week and then have him, without facing this Georgia front seven for the games that follow after that. So we'll have to see how this goes. Here's the one thing I'm going to just say briefly, and we'll leave it here for now, but we'll probably return to this during the week. I get the sense that Georgia is going to be very motivated for this game on Saturday for a number of reasons. I just sort of think that Georgia is going to give South Carolina its best shot. Gigantic point spread. I think it may be worth following here for this week. I think that Georgia is going to be quite ready for the Gamecocks for a number of reasons. I have my reasons for feeling that way. Some of them obvious, maybe some of them less so. But Georgia ready for the Gamecocks on Saturday, I fully believe. And I'll just leave it at that for right now. In other words, some of what Georgia fans may think Georgia's looking to do the following Saturday against Vanderbilt, maybe that happens a week earlier. Maybe that happens a week earlier against South Carolina, and we'll just sort of see how all of that goes. I thought it was fascinating to see Arkansas and Texas on Saturday. This was a terrific performance for Sam Pittman, who I just love. And Pittman after the game, great locker room speech. There was the video that some of you saw where like Pittman's like walking by a tailgate, grabs one the beanbags for the cornhole and tosses it right through the hole on the first try. Like, Pittman is what I want college football to be. This is a guy who's comfortable in his own skin. He's just kind of a guy, just kind of a dude. Like, he doesn't think more of himself than he is, doesn't think less of himself than he is. He's just kind of a guy who's kind of comfortable in his own skin, having the time of his life in a state that he loves, coaching that state's flagship football program. And he beat Texas on Saturday. And listen, I realize that Fayetteville's like the outer rim of the galaxy. It's sort of hard to even imagine that people even exist that far from here. But the truth is like, if you were there in that kind of southwest quadrant of the SEC, I think you'd have a better understanding for how much the Texas game means when a school like Arkansas gets a chance to play them. And in future years, they may play them every year. Once Texas is in the SEC, very good chance they will. But right now, those games are kind of fleeting. They come, few and far between. And when Texas plays Arkansas, it is a big deal for the Hogs fans to beat them. It's one of those things that combines the generations. The old folks remember the Frank Broyles, days, and Gary Royal, I guess, is the Texas coach. They have memories of that. The younger folks just don't like Texas because Texas was acting like Texas. But either way, it's like brings the generation together. It's just a huge, huge deal all the way around. And I'm thrilled for Pittman, man. He's put a great staff together there. He's clearly got some talented players. As I told you earlier, that game for Georgia on October 2nd looks like that's a game where Georgia's going to have to be focused. It's going to have to, play at its best. But for now, all I'm really thinking about is the fact that on Saturday, Pittman really, waved the flag for the SEC by beating the Longhorns and really, really sent a message that when you look at these up-and-coming coaches in the SEC, first- and second-year guys, the feel-good story that Pittman started last season with is really carrying over into 2021. Great game in the SEC East. We thought this would be a good game. I was on the wrong side of the result. But nonetheless, Kentucky beats Missouri. A lot of folks now saying that Kentucky ought to be a top 25 team on the heels of getting this win. And Will Levis, we talked about last week that, okay, so we talk about an emerging star after last week's games, and Levis, the Kentucky quarterback, may be that right now. New look offense, better than the one that Eddie Graham is trying to run. And Levis, the Penn State transfer, displacing Joey Gatewood. At one point in time, I probably thought was going to emerge as starting quarterback there. Kentucky really looks like a real team. And for those folks who kind of assume that the SEC East was only Georgia, that it was the easiest division in college football beyond the Dogs, well, I don't. Saturday's result calls some of that into question with, Kentucky winning the game, but Missouri fighting hard on the road. I think both those teams are teams I'm interested in seeing more from. So the SEC East all of a sudden maybe seems a little tougher based on the way that Missouri and Kentucky played each other. Texas A&M struggled but finally won at Colorado. A lot of you kind of mocked me for this because I talked up Texas A&M a lot during the offseason. But keep this in mind. This game on Saturday actually shows how right I was about Texas A&M. Because ultimately, while I believe that the Aggies have a chance to go 11-1, I stopped short of picking them to win the SEC West, at least for this year. I think that comes for them. I think it could come as soon as next year. But I made it pretty clear that while I like Texas A&M to put a pretty record together, this is not a team I took seriously to win the SEC West, because they're simply not explosive enough offensively. Now, Saturday's game mitigated by the factor of Haynes King, the starting quarterback, getting injured. But this is not a dynamic offensive team. It wasn't a year ago either. They're good defensively. They can run the football, but they don't have that dynamic offensive component. And maybe at some point in time people noticed that and kind of called Jimbo out for it a little bit more. So Saturday's game, a struggle for the Aggies on the road, closer than I thought the game admittedly would be, but the ultimate result just proves how correct I was about Texas A&M. This is a team that's going to rack up wins, but their offense not explosive enough to be a real championship contender right now. And that was what we kind of saw there from that. I'll quickly say this. Look ahead to this weekend's games. I think Auburn has a real chance on the road at Penn State after coasting in cupcake games week 1, week 2. Penn State's a high-profile matchup. It's also a winnable game as well. So a little bit interesting to see how Brian Harsin does in his first big spot, big stage in the whiteout game in Happy Valley coming up this weekend. The other game I'll briefly mention here just for a quick moment is Florida hosting Alabama. Now, the story here is the emerging controversy where it seems like Emory Jones is just the wrong starting quarterback for Florida. We called this. We said this over and over again. It was obvious during the spring that Jones did not quite have as much of a handle on this starting quarterback job as some of the media thought he did. Anthony Richardson's just the more dynamic athlete, I believe, and there's a chance he's also the better pure passer there too. He should be the starting quarterback. At the very least, he ought to play the most against Alabama on Saturday. And here's one of those things where I have to be honest and kind of go off-brand a little bit while doing so. I think there's a chance that Florida keeps it closer with Alabama on Saturday than almost anybody expects. The point spread suggests that already. Florida's only about a 13.5 or so point underdog at home, at least at last check. The line may have moved a little bit since then. But at last check, Florida's only about a 2-touchdown underdog, whereas after seeing Alabama completely dominate Miami in week 1, you would be left to believe that Alabama's just going to dominate everybody it plays, including on the road at Florida this week. But keep in mind here that the Miami team that Alabama dominated struggled with Appalachian State. Once again, I don't want to get obsessed with comparative scores, but there is something to be said that the dominance week 1 for Alabama over Miami was more of a story of what Miami isn't than what Alabama is. Also, this is one of those things where honesty compels me to admit Florida actually played Alabama fairly close in the SEC championship game a year ago. Different personnel than it's going to have on Saturday, but they also have the advantage of being at home here. I would be shocked, you could knock me over with a feather, if Florida were to win this game. But I will not be surprised if Florida keeps it closer than the experts think. So kind of a big spot for the Gators in Gainesville on Saturday. And as I said, as much as it pains me to admit, I sort of am on guard for Florida playing a little better than some assume they're probably going to. Will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, I want to get back to the Dogs here for a moment. And I thought that Jamari Salyer, one of the most important leaders on this Georgia roster, him talking about Stetson Bennett after the game was really pretty interesting. Now, listen, no one's going to dispute that JT Daniels is quarterback 1 for Georgia, QB1 as they like to say. No one's going to dispute that. As I told you at the very beginning of the show, that to me, the Bennett performance is kind of the Georgia multiverse. It's sort of the kind of alternate reality version of Georgia football, explosive with Bennett there at the helm, and Bennett's kind of an interesting story, but not necessarily a story that grows from where it currently is. But it is obvious that the Georgia players themselves love Stetson. And the way in which Georgia players have talked about Bennett is the way that you want players talking about their quarterback. There is just something about quarterback that's different than the other positions in which you want to cultivate a level of belief amongst the players in that guy who stands at the helm at the quarterback spot. Football's just kind of always been that way, always will be that way. So if you want to know why Bennett may have gotten the nod on Saturday, just listen to what the players are saying about him. Salyer said some great things about Stetson, an example of that from Saturday right here.
Has lived the life of a college athlete to the fullest. So when it comes to his story, he's got that it factor. He's always going to show when his number's called. And he's a good kid. He's a good person. You know what I'm saying? He's easy to laugh with, always joking, smiling, singing. It's just Stet's a hard person not to like. And so, when people do good and they're lovable people and they give their all to you and to your team, it's hard to not rally around a person like that.
Now, I know what you may be thinking, that Georgia players always say that about their quarterbacks, but you can kind of tell one thing from the next. It's one thing to say, we believe in all of our quarterbacks and whoever's out there, it's our job to go out there and win and play well for the guy who's out there. You can kind of tell when it's like the robotic pre-programmed answer, and you can kind of tell when it's the genuine inflection of the voice that leads you to believe that, no, they really do kind of like this guy. Jamari, I think you kind of get the example of all of that there. So I am glad to hear Jamari report that Stetson's enjoying his life as a college athlete, because it's actually pretty amazing what he's done. I mean, think about this. You can say, well, he's not the greatest quarterback in the country, but he's probably the best a quarterback could be, having apparently practiced as little as he does. Remember, when he was named the starting when he came in at quarterback against Arkansas week 1 a year ago, I mean, I'm not even sure when he practiced, because they're giving all the reps to JT Daniels and Jamie Newman. Come to find out, Daniels is hurt. Newman opts out. Then they give all the reps to Dwan Mathis. We hadn't heard one word about Stetson Bennett. Lo and behold, Bennett comes in there and saves the day. Had a couple of good games after that there as well. On Saturday, after all the practice talk had been about other guys, he steps on the field and played the way that he did. It's a pretty amazing career that he's put together, all things being equal. And so Jamari Salyer says he's enjoying himself as a college athlete. I'm happy that's true. And I'll tell you this, Salyer also said some other great things about Bennett there too. It's a video worth seeking out there online at the DawgNation YouTube page. By the way, speaking of Bennett, let's also make him one of the subjects of our golden shoes today. I talked about this on our DawgNation postgame show on Saturday, presented by the UGA bookstore and at the UGA bookstore, that Bennett's one of these guys that I'm not sure what he does during practice. I almost pictured he's like in just kind of this protective glass, and you just sort of broke the glass in an emergency situation. Well, our buddy the Green Soldier, terrific YouTube commenter, kind of gave me a version of that on Photoshop of in case of emergency break glass for Bennett. That's kind of what he's become for UGA, and it's actually a pretty admirable role that he plays there. So pretty good stuff by our buddy the Green Soldier. Sharing that on Twitter will make him the Golden Shoe winner. Also, our buddy Mad Dog. AAA brought our Doghouse to us today, but they also bring us On the Road with Jeff Sentell on Fridays. Mad Dog saying, when I see Jeff Sentell on the road, this is what I imagine. Sentell there with the great Smokey and the Bandit. Really good stuff from Mad Dog. We'll make that a Golden Shoe winner there as well. Very funny. Gatorade countdown, 47 days from right now. We will see all of you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. All right, good stuff, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews podcast cool down. So I kind of went blank there for a moment because Burt Reynolds' name escaped me. I almost called him Tom Selleck. I'm so glad I didn't do that. So glad. It's one of those things where our buddy Mad Dog was showing Jeff off with Smoking the Bandit, and Burt Reynolds. It's really weird in the midst of like talking for what seems like hours on end. Sometimes like the most basic stuff just sort of escapes you. Burt Reynolds, one of the most famous people on the planet, and in that particular moment, I just could not come up with the name. I almost wanted to call him Tom Selleck. Which, nothing wrong with Selleck, of course. Also a famous mustache in his own right. But clearly, not Burt Reynolds. And obviously, Smoking the Bandit, one of the most important movies for Georgians of a certain age, given the fact that it was, filmed in Georgia. Of course, I'm a little too young for that as a first-run movie, but I've seen it on replay many times. And also Burt Reynolds, the great former Florida State player there as well. Roommate of Lee Corso, I believe, is the famous lore on all of that. So good stuff from Jeff Sentell and Burt Reynolds there together in the gorgeous Trans Am. I remember one time at Lenox Square Mall, they have like the super fancy cars that the valets will kind of park right up there at the front. Of course, I haven't been to Lenox in a minute, but that's a different story for a different day. The point though is they have those like really fancy cars that the valets park up there at the front. Like one day it was like I was there, it was like Ferrari, Lamborghini, and then like the third car, like right up there, was like this perfect replica of that old school Trans Am, like totally restored, big, eagle bird right there on the hood. It was really cool. Really good stuff all the way around. All right, R.S. Andrews cool down. Let's do some comments. DawgNation.com. We'll do Facebook. We'll do YouTube, and then we'll get out of here. A few minutes time. Chase Barbie says Bennett definitely put pressure on JT to keep the offense flying. Yeah, maybe that's the case. I mean, I think what's probably more likely is if you've got a quarterback who's proven capable of winning games against SEC competition and even dominating a group of 5 bowl team, that's a better backup quarterback than most SEC teams are probably going to have. Now, listen, if your starting quarterback gets injured, your national championship hopes for the most part are put on ice. But in short bursts, I mean, think about this for a moment. Who is Auburn's backup quarterback? I follow the SEC pretty closely. I'm not sure I could tell you. Who is Matt Corral's backup at Ole Miss? I follow the SEC pretty closely. I don't believe I could tell you that. Who is Will Levis's backup at Kentucky? It's not Joey Gatewood anymore. Gatewood's gone. Who is Connor Basilick's backup at Missouri? I don't know the answer to that either. There are a handful of teams in the SEC that are, not awful teams, kind of middle-tier teams. Who's KJ Jefferson's backup at Arkansas? I don't know the answer to that. I follow this league pretty closely, but I couldn't tell you all 14 backups in this league right now because some of them are just not of note. So the fact that Georgia has a backup quarterback in Stetson Bennett that people know, it's not enough to preserve a national championship if Daniels were to miss the entirety of the season in all likelihood. But short bursts on a game basis or a partial game basis, having a backup quarterback with those credentials could be valuable at some point in time. William Perry says, I'm hilarious. He says, my second favorite team almost loses, and you say, see, I was right. But in this particular case, William, not only was I right, I was precise. Remember, we on the show made a big deal about this in the summer, because I know this comes across as self-serving, but in this particular case, it has the byproduct of also being correct. I've picked the winner of the SEC West 4 years in a row. In 2017, I saw Auburn coming before it happened. I said on SEC Country Live every day leading into that season. I got laughed at for doing so, but I was right. In 2018, called Alabama. Fairly easy call. There was not an upstart to the Crimson Tide. In 2019, I correctly called LSU. If you want to go back and dig through the archives, you can hear me saying that. There were only 3 people in the SEC at SEC Media Days that picked LSU to win the SEC that season. But on this show, we made a very, very clear case for LSU winning the SEC West. Obviously, we turned out to be correct on that. Last year, we went back to the Crimson Tide. That was the correct thing to do. So this is one of those things where I get plenty of predictions wrong, but I have a nice little streak going on my SEC West prediction. So I do try to get that one right because, listen, I want to try to hang my hat where it goes. And so I was obviously tempted to pick Texas A&M to win the SEC West because I am a believer in what Jimbo is building there. I do think that's a program on the rise. But ultimately, we were very, very clear that this was not the year in which they were going to be capable of doing that because offensively, they don't have the firepower to get that done, that we didn't like their wide receivers. And we love what they do defensively, and we like what they do with the running game, but the passing attack's just not there for Texas A&M right now. So while I thought they would win against Colorado easier than they did, ultimately the fact that game was made closer by an offense that just didn't really quite fire on all cylinders, I mean, that just shows the precision of our prediction around here. Now, the King injury makes that a little bit of a more complicated topic, but ultimately this is what Texas A&M is right now, a team that's going to rack up wins without the benefit of a very impressive offense, and Saturday was another step in that direction. Brian Whitehead says, Chase Barbie says, so now I'm picking Pittman and the Razorbacks. I think Sam Pittman's doing a pretty good job. And by the way, William Perry, thank you for the credit. He says, I remember the call on LSU. I appreciate that, William. Thank you. He says, it was an obvious that UAB's defensive game plan was to stop the run. Kirby may be playing bait and switch by leaking that Beck was starting. The UAB defense was thinking that we were going to go ground and pound. Maybe so. And ultimately, I think what Brian is pointing out there is what I hope ends up being true, which is that think about the Mississippi State game a year ago. A lot of ways, what Georgia did against Mississippi State was similar to what it did against UAB in that it threw the ball plenty. There were more touchdowns in the game against UAB, but they threw the ball plenty, and they did not really run it at all. That there are a lot of teams that are just not expecting Georgia to beat them with the pass, or knowing that it's likely you're going to lose to Georgia anyway, they're more comfortable asking Georgia to throw to win. I remember I was in the presence of a smart coach one time, and he was talking about his game plan, and he said, when it comes to defense, I'm not trying to stop you. I'm trying to get you to do something you don't want to do. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it from a philosophical standpoint, that the job of a defense isn't to stop you, it's just to force you to do something uncomfortable. And so I think opposing defenses, as the commenter mentioned a moment ago, do assume that Georgia is still uncomfortable throwing the football. They would rather beat you with the running game. And they're going to say, well, you may beat us, but we're going to ask you to beat us doing something you don't really want to do. And on Saturday, Georgia was more than capable of doing that. And it could be that the struggles of the offensive line, as Smart himself kind of mentioned, or the struggles of the running game by the basis of the stats. It could be that was a game plan once again sold out to stop the run. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that one way or another, but there's a chance that could be true. Let's get a couple comments here. James Crump says Bennett would have most likely beaten Alabama in the SEC championship, or at least something in the SEC championship game. Alabama would implement the Bennett blueprint for 4 quarters instead of after halftime. He would lose that game. The only elite team he might beat would be Oklahoma. Yeah, I mean, I just think that I think people grade Bennett on an unfair curve. I do. I've felt that way going back to last year. I thought there were, some media people that took cheap shots at Bennett sometimes. It's an easy thing to do. Like, the one thing I'm not going to use my platform to do is punch down on anybody. And I thought there was some cheap shots of him that I found to be pretty distasteful. And I'm not afraid to say that. But generally speaking, I thought that that fans just kind of graded Bennett on kind of an unfair curve. They wanted to basically eviscerate him, or whatever word you want to use, because he was not the best quarterback in college football, when actually he gave Georgia a better quarterback than it otherwise would have. Like, I get the frustration for Georgia fans when it comes to quarterbacks. If you want to talk about what happened in 2018, or if you want to talk about Jake Fromm leaving after 2019, or if you want to talk about Jamie Newman not sticking around in 2020, or if you want to talk about late stages of 2020, starting JT Daniels, apparently he was only healthy enough for the Mississippi State game and not the week before, the game that really mattered, against Florida. Like, I get all the frustration with all of that. And on a different day, we can get more into it all the way around. Like, that's a lot of weird news for one fan base to endure at the quarterback spot. I get that. But in and around that, Stetson Bennett stepped in to play better in a real game than anyone ever thought he'd play, got you at least one win you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. Georgia would have lost the season opener last year at Arkansas if not for Stetson Bennett. I don't see how you make the argument of anything else other than that. If Bennett had not been available to Georgia last year, Daniels wasn't healthy enough to play, Dwan Mathis was really struggling, and, Carson Beck at that point in time was brand new. And if it wasn't for Bennett back then, Georgia probably loses that game. And he really played as well as any Georgia quarterback could have been expected to play in the following weeks against Auburn and against Tennessee. People point out he played a good first half against Alabama. And at that point in time, maybe some limitations started showing up. Bennett's not always the most careful guy with the football. That's another thing that I think is true about Bennett, is that people think of him, well, he must be a game manager because he's a guy that was at a JUCO and was a scout team quarterback. He must be a game manager. The truth is like, part of Bennett's problem is he's not enough of a game manager. Like, he's more willing to kind of throw the ball into harm's way than maybe sometimes he should be. But the point is like, there are a lot of people who want to, I think, take out on Bennett their frustrations with the Georgia quarterback situation in general. But when you look at the Georgia quarterback story over the course of the last few years, Bennett's like the one bright spot there. A lot of other things have been more disappointing than you thought they would be. In the case of Bennett, it's been a more pleasant surprise than you should have expected it to be, and sometimes doesn't quite get credit for that. Now, with all that said, like, some people listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth and interpret that as me saying that he's the next, Kyler Murray or something like that. That's not what I'm, or whatever NFL quarterback you want to slot in there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that he played a very fun game on Saturday and gave Georgia a better quarterbacking performance in the first half of last season than it otherwise would have gotten had he not been there. It's not Bennett's fault that Jamie Newman opted out. And it's not Bennett's fault that Jake Fromm left after his junior season with his NFL draft status uncertain. And anything that happened in 2018 on this team was not Bennett's fault either. Bennett was only the guy that stepped in after all that occurred. And frankly, as a Georgia fan, I'm glad that Georgia had him. Let's see what else. Nate Small says, if Beck isn't ready, why didn't Brock get a shot? We act like a true freshman can't play quarterback. We can't beat Bama with Stetson Bennett. But Georgia wasn't playing Alabama on Saturday. They were playing UAB. And the reason why Brock Vandegrift did not start on Saturday is because he was in high school 5 minutes ago. And that's a fact. And you say, well, what about Trevor Lawrence? Trevor Lawrence, was a freshman quarterback for Clemson, won the national championship in 2018. Trevor Lawrence was also the number one player in the entire country. And Stetson Bennett was Brock Vandegrift was a 5-star. And I think that Vandegrift's potential future at Georgia is very bright, much the same way I think that Beck's is potentially very bright there as well. But the assumption you should make is that your current true freshman probably won't be as good as Trevor Lawrence was. Results are just not typical there. You see that kind of disclaimer in commercials sometimes, results not typical, the big weight loss formula or whatever else. Lawrence doing what he did as a true freshman those are just not typical results. A lot of the other young quarterbacks that have played well in college football over the course of the last decade were not true freshmen, they were redshirt freshmen. Manziel, Jameis, guys like that were redshirt freshmen, not true freshmen. Even Tua Tagovailoa, was not tabbed at Alabama until near the end of his true freshman season, not really given that, opportunity there near the beginning of the year. That Saturday, and this is the one thing I'm just going to keep saying over and over again because I know that I'm right. Saturday was not G-Day Part 2. Saturday was not 2022 audition. Saturday was a regular season game against an opponent that Georgia thought was good enough to be dangerous at the beginning of that game. It's one of the reasons why they came out throwing those haymakers the way they did. They did not want UAB to have any reason to believe in itself. Georgia had respect for UAB, and so therefore of its available quarterbacks, it picked the best, currently most game-ready quarterback to do so. It's not a reflection of what's going to happen in 2022 because that's several months from now. The only thing Georgia could do on Saturday was come up with the best game plan to play and beat the opponent that it played. And had it done anything other than that, some of the same people who are saying, well, why didn't you play this guy? Why didn't you play that guy? Some of the same people saying all that kind of stuff would have ripped Georgia mightily had it treated this like a tune-up audition had it not gone well. And from a 0-0 start against that kind of defense from UAB, it is not a given it would have gone well with anybody else other than Stetson Bennett there at the start there for that spot. Ryan Walker says Justin Fields is the number one player in the country. He briefly was number one. Lawrence started number one, finished as number one. Fields was briefly number one, but he finished number two. Jamie Huff said he didn't think that Beck looked ready. Here's the thing about Beck. It's like I thought he did fine for what he is, a guy who is still working his way through all of this. This was the second game of his second year on campus. His first year on campus was the weirdest year in the history of college football. It included no spring practice. It included, quarterbacks learn from each other. But if you think about last year, how much did these guys even get a chance to really be around each other because of COVID and all that kind of stuff? So not only is Beck still a young guy, his year of learning and growth was the strangest year in the history of the sport. Beck throwing an interception on Saturday is no big deal to me. It's not a referendum on him at all. It's not a signal that something's wrong with him as a player. He's just a young dude. And we mentioned the Lawrence thing a moment ago. The fact of the matter is, as of late, quarterback has become a little bit more of a experienced player's position. Early days of the college football playoff, a lot of new starters and young players were leading their team to great success. Last couple of years, Mac Jones last year was a 2017 signee for Alabama. He waited a long time to play quarterback at Alabama. He started for the Patriots his first game yesterday. College football is different than the pros. These guys get drafted in the NFL, and they start from week one. It doesn't happen as much right now for the elite programs in college football. There is a little bit of waiting sometimes that's expected. Joe Burrow in 2019, he's 30 years old when he started for LSU. I say that half kiddingly, but this is a guy that, was at Ohio State, left, had a year of growth and learning in 2018, had the explosive year in 2019. Quarterback as of late is becoming a little bit more of an experienced player's position. Think about C.J. Stroud, young quarterback at Ohio State right now. That's a player that I like. A lot of Georgia fans liked him coming out of high school. He may still be a very good quarterback. But in a Buckeyes offense that we're used to seeing really hum, Stroud's struggling right now because that's what young quarterbacks often do. Let's see. On YouTube here for a moment. Let's see if we can find a YouTube comment to read. Paul Moon says it's going to be interesting how much time JT needs to heal up. At this rate, he's no way a lock for the first round. I wouldn't be shocked if he decides to come back if he has to sit another week or two. Yeah, I don't know about that as far as the future goes here, but my understanding of the oblique situation is that when it's aggravated, it's really painful, and it obviously impacts your ability to throw the football, propel the ball as strongly as you want to. I have no reason to believe that Daniels is – I couldn't even pretend to tell you what his status is, but this is a story worth watching because it was not part of some grand master plan to have Daniels not playing on Saturday. It was not a insignificant choice to choose not to play him, to not have that available to you. For the reasons that the commenter mentions, I mean, Daniels clearly wants to play because he's trying to earn his way into the first round. If the season ended today, it's not obvious he would be a first-round pick, but he clearly wants to be one. So showing that he's healthy is a big part of the story for JT Daniels. And for the Georgia offense to be as effective as it needs to be, by the time it needs to be, you got to have these moments where this offense plays together to get there. This is not, just flip the switch and everything's going to be fine. You have to work your way up to all of that. And Daniels not playing is something worth monitoring and figuring out when that's going to be available. I never know if this is Skylar Thomas or Schuler Thomas, and I apologize if I've mispronounced. And I'm sure that he's told me his first name pronunciation before. But Mr. Thomas says, we better be happy we have Bennett with COVID and everything else that's going on. Remember when Ohio State went through 3 different quarterbacks, won the national title? I'm comfortable with Bennett. He's referencing 2014 when it went from what? You finally ended up with Cardell Jones after that third iteration, 2 different replacements. You finally ended up with Cardell Jones. And obviously Jones played great in the 2014 college football playoff. And, yeah, I do think having a capable backup is a nice luxury to have. And I think that if JT Daniels were to get seriously hurt and he was not able to play, at all for the rest of the season at some point in time, my belief in Georgia as a national championship contender would be greatly diminished at that point, greatly diminished. But for now, in a one-game basis to have a guy that stepped in for Daniels and play as well as he did, even if it was not against SEC competition, that was pretty good. Jake Shipe says he's got Ole Miss beating Texas A&M by 35 points. We'll see about that. Scott Harris says he also evaluates the size of a high school when making some of these decisions, and that's possibly true. Brian McPhail says Bennett was very accurate, was able to sling the ball. And, yeah, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's actually just pretty fascinating to watch a player play well. And sometimes it doesn't have to mean more than, oh, my gosh, did you see the way that so-and-so played in this particular game? That's the thing with Bennett, too. It's like it doesn't have to be a referendum against somebody who didn't start or a referendum on what should happen the rest of the year. Sometimes it's just a show. Sometimes it's just entertainment. And Bennett on Saturday really put together an entertaining show, and I don't think it has to be much more than that. Texas Dog says there's a reason these 5-star quarterbacks want to play for Georgia. They run a pro-style offense as opposed to what Ohio State runs, which is a 1 or 2 read offense that doesn't fully prepare you. Yeah, I don't know about that. Ohio State's putting first-round quarterbacks into the league year after year after year. Georgia's still struggling to do that, working its way up to try to do that. So I get the fact that narrative may be out there, but if Ohio State's not preparing quarterbacks for the NFL hasn't figured that out because they keep taking Ohio State quarterbacks, early on in the draft. And I know that Fields got a chance to play a little bit yesterday, and I'm sure it's probably frustrating for him that he was used by Nagy in much the same way that he was used in his early days there at Georgia. Eventually he's going to overtake what's his name? Andy Dalton for the starting quarterback spot there, and we'll see how he plays as a rookie when he does so. He's probably already the most popular athlete in Chicago. That's a big sports town with a lot of sports franchises, but there's nobody in Chicago right now more popular than Justin Fields is. H.R. Pickin' Stuff says Stetson Bennett is better than Beck. And that may not always be true. Beck may eventually be the best quarterback that's come through Georgia. But as of right now, I don't know how anybody could argue with that point. And if you expect Kirby Smart to start less than the better player in any role before any game, the onus is on you to explain why that's the case. Johnny Lester says, Dog, South Carolina this week, let the SEC East beatdown parade begin. yeah, I am kind of expecting a beat down on Saturday. I think that Georgia's going to be more than ready to do that. I really do. I think that Georgia's quite fired up for this game. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says, I'll take a national championship with Stetson Bennett. Shane P. says, Vandergrift provides a better future for UGA than Beck. You may be right. There's obviously plenty of easy reasons to peg Vandergrift in that regard, but I'm not going to even pretend to know how that competition would play out between the two of them. Even had Beck let's say that Beck started on Saturday, and let's say that he played as well as Stetson Bennett did. Let's say that every stat that Bennett had, Beck got. Now, the way that Beck would be treated would be way different. There'd be so much chatter around Beck, and some of it would probably even feel like hype of, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be, the next great thing. I would have done my best on the show to temper all of this. Much the same way, I don't think it's that big of a deal that Beck did not start the game on Saturday and played maybe only okay when he did start, when he did get a chance to play. I would have also tried to temper my belief on Beck had he come in the game and thrown a bunch of touchdowns at the very beginning of the game. That would have not have been enough for me to say, well, this is definitely your starter for 2022, and Brock Vandergrift can either be happy being the backup or look for a new school. Like, I just wouldn't have said that. That Vandergrift is in the same spot now that Beck was a year ago. Much the same way I would have looked at Kirby Smart like he was crazy had he just kind of thrown Beck into the fire from the very beginning of last year. I would have sort of not expected Vandergrift to just kind of be tossed out there as well. Like, this was a Georgia program in 2016, 2017 that had to play freshman quarterbacks because they had no better options. But at a certain point, you want to grow beyond that as a program. At a certain point, you want to mature to the point that you're not in desperate need of a freshman quarterback to come in and save you. And so, that's kind of where the Georgia program is right now. So the point about Vandergrift is this. It is probably true that Beck is ahead of him right now, but Vandergrift is also encountering the kind of steep learning curve that Beck encountered a year ago. You get the impression, based on people that I've talked to, that at a certain point Beck kind of crested over that steep learning curve, and suddenly now he's able to really grow, that he's able to kind of get more comfortable being in college, more comfortable being in the program, more ready to play, and things start happening for him a little quicker. Vandergrift may be kind of in the midst of that steep learning curve right now, but eventually he'll crest over the top of that probably. And at that point in time, he'll start moving pretty well there as well. So in other words, the 2022 starting quarterback competition at Georgia hasn't started yet. I mean, I'm sure Kirby Smart tells these guys that it has. But the truth is the real competition begins once Vandergrift has had almost a year in the program, because there's a huge difference between a guy with 1 year experience and a guy with 0 years experience. I would suggest there is a little bit less of a difference between a guy with 2 years experience and a guy with 1 year experience. The difference between 1 and 0 is gigantic. The difference between 2 and 1, maybe not quite so much. Chris Branham says, I actually miss Joe Cox. That guy could sling it. What's funny about Cox is it actually kind of reminds me of Bennett from Saturday. So Cox had the game against Arkansas, was it in 2009? I think it was 2009, where he was like National Player of the Week. He played, it's like one of the best single game performances in Georgia history. And the rest of the season didn't quite match all that. Stetson Bennett was like that a little bit in 2015. Like against South Carolina, he set records. I mean, he basically ran Steve Spurrier into retirement. And the rest of the season didn't quite match up with all that. Like Georgia has actually kind of a weird history of quarterbacks for one game playing like Goliath, and sometimes it doesn't always regenerate. Like I said before, it's like multiverse. It's like sometimes the Georgia quarterback performance kind of exists in kind of a one-off special world. Cox in 2009 against Arkansas, Lambert in 2015 against South Carolina, maybe Bennett Saturday against UAB. But if it was the case for Stetson, it wouldn't be the first time that's been true for Georgia quarterback in the past. Keith Fold says Fran Tarkenton was probably the best quarterback at UGA. Certainly very good back in the late 50s. Epic Robinson says, I need to stop answering troll comments. But in the case, I actually was thinking about Joe Cox. It's funny that he came out in the comment section. I was actually thinking about him a little bit today, because if you started making a list of the best single game performances for Georgia quarterbacks, I mean, Cox against Arkansas in 2009, doesn't that show up in that discussion at some point in time? Somebody said, was it Matt Rukavina said that about Bennett and Mahomes in the same sentence, 5 touchdowns and 15 or fewer passes? It's kind of funny. Hugh Nash says, I believe we are rotating running backs way too frequently. Maybe so, but have you seen anything from any of them that makes you think one should get carries at the expense of another? I mean, as I've said before, I think the best version of Georgia is taking, the 4 guys who are getting carries and finding 2 who can get the most out of those carries. But based on what I've seen in 2 games, I'm not quite so sure who should be elevated and who should be voted off the island. I'm just not. I'm seeing some chatter for Kenny McIntosh right now. The McIntosh touchdown Saturday was pretty brilliant. But, I think the problem with paring down the number of guys who are getting carries, I don't know. I just don't know how you pare that down right now on the basis of what you're seeing, and especially if you assume that practice is going the same way. So this is the other thing that kind of shows up. Running back conversation among Georgia fans, a little bit similar to quarterback conversation. People have a tendency to assume that the guy they are seeing is average, but the guy they're not seeing must be great. But logic would just dictate that's not likely to be true. That sometimes seeing a player play more has a weird byproduct of being disappointing for fans because they find out that nothing lives up to the image they had in their imagination. And it's just really important to stay grounded when it comes to stuff like that. Darrell Fleming mentioning Gunnar Stockton in this conversation as an early enrollee arrival at Georgia come January. And, yeah, listen, Stockton's a very good player. He's, putting up gigantic numbers for Rabun County, but Stockton will be in the same place in 2022 that Brock Vandegrift is in right now and that Carson Beck was in the year before that. And, 36 months from now, who knows between these 3 who actually emerges as the best quarterback. But this is a thing where a little bit of experience is pretty valuable. Hugh Nash says about the running backs, that's my point. You can't know who to go with if you don't give them consecutive reps. They don't have the chance to get rolling. Maybe so. I guess I'm not quite as big of a believer in the hot hand theory when it comes to the running back spot, but I understand where you're coming from with that. I do understand where you're coming from. One way or another, the Georgia running game's got to be better. Either it's playing certain players more, certain players less, opening up holes with the offensive line, or whatever. The Georgia running game right now is not really performing at a super high level. Fitzgerald Wiggleton says it'd be nice to have an undefeated Arkansas team coming in a couple of weeks. Yeah, for a lot of fans who just want a marquee home game, they don't really feel like they're getting one this year. An undefeated Pittman would kind of be a chance to have some of that. Paul Moon says it's still mind-boggling to me that we prioritize Jacob Park and Bryce Ramsey over Deshaun Watson. I know Watson is in trouble now as a player, but listen, that's always going to be one of those things where, like, a lot of Georgia fans have a bad taste about that, and you better believe I do. I'm from Gainesville. I didn't go to Gainesville High School, but I'm from Hall County, and I can promise you, those people up there in that part of Northeast Georgia will never forget that, for sure. VA Dog or Virginia Dog says enough about quarterbacks. This portion of the show, VA, I'm just kind of reading what other people are saying. Green Soldier, our golden shoe winner for today, says, we need to teach some UGA fans just be happy in the moment. Walking out of Charlotte, I was already hearing how bad the offense was. I do think that's kind of a thing. Now, I don't experience much of that in person at the games. My experience is the people at the games are typically pretty happy. But I do think, I honestly have this fear that one of these days Georgia's going to win a national championship and there's going to be a certain pocket of Georgia fans who are still not going to be happy. I think that's absolutely possible. I do. I think it is absolutely possible. I think being happy is a skill. I really do. And I think people kind of assume that external circumstances determine your level of happiness. I honestly don't think that's the case. I think it's your internal perspective that determines your happiness. I know this sounds like philosophical blowhard stuff, but I do truly believe there are some Georgia fans who have not exercised the muscles that allow them to be happy. And they're always assuming that one day the world around them is going to fall into place perfectly, and finally the world around them will allow them to be happy. And that is just not how life works. And in this particular case, sports is no different than life. It's just not. That you either know how to be happy or you don't, and you learn how to be happy no matter what your circumstances are, which set you up to enjoy things even more when maybe things do take a turn for the better for you. But there are some people who, and it's just sad, it makes me very sad to think about this on behalf of these people. My life's not impacted by it one way or another necessarily. But there are some people who Georgia could win the national championship this season, and they'd still wonder why this 4-star player that was recruited 2 years ago is not playing. Like they just are not capable of being happy, and I hate it for them. Just don't be one of those people, because that is no way to go through life. Let's see what else. Enrique Isidro says that being happy is a personal choice. It really, truly is. Robert Barnes says, I believe that we have some of the most negative fans in college football. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think there's really, because I do SEC Country Live, and I've kind of congregated with other SEC fans for a long time, and it's really late. We got to get ready to go. I don't get the impression there's anything related to Georgia that's all that different than much of the other fan bases. I think that negativity breeds more negativity, and I think there's a lot of outlets now that allow you to connect with the most negative appraisal, in much the same way that, people are more motivated to leave a bad restaurant review than a positive restaurant review. I mean, a lot of the online conversation is more propelled by what people are angry about than what people are happy about. Matt Presley says, how about this? You talk about hitting me close to home here. He says, Johnson High School grad, Chestnut Mountain Elementary, representing Hall County, don't think either is still in operation. So Chestnut Mountain is still in operation. It's just a different place than it used to be. And Johnson is right there trying to put one foot in front of the other, just like it always was. My alma mater last year scored 17 total points all season. I realize the pandemic shortened year, and I'm sure they probably played fewer than 10 regular season games. But my alma not exactly shining when it comes to football. Let me get William Perry. We got to get ready to go, y'all. We can't go this long every day. There's too much going on around here. I can't leave people working for this long. William Perry says, in the stadium, you could see the look of disappointment on Milton's face when the snap got botched. We were on the 2-yard line. That was going to be his first touchdown. What moment was that exactly, William? Some of the game runs together for me. What moment was that exactly? But obviously, you had a chance to score, and everybody wants that first touchdown. By the way, shout out to Carson Beck, threw his first touchdown. Shout out to Justin Robinson, caught his first touchdown on Saturday. So there were a lot of good firsts in a game like that. I guess it was also Brock Bowers' first touchdown too. So there were some cool firsts. It would have been nice to see Kendall get his first touchdown. Brian McPhail says, am I announcing Friday night? Yeah, we got a fun game on Friday. We're going to Marietta High School. One of my favorite things to do is go to cool stadiums. And this will be the third really cool stadium. Now, we've also gone to some really nice stadiums. To me, there's a big difference between a nice stadium and a cool stadium. Like Alatoona, we were at the other day, a very nice stadium. We do some nice stadiums. A lot of these schools now spend big money on nice stadiums. I like cool stadiums. Not that I don't like nice stadiums. I like them too. But I love the cool old stadiums, like City Park in Gainesville. I'm not a Gainesville grad. That's not a biased statement. Gainesville was a big rival of me growing up. As I said before, I went to Johnson. Gainesville didn't think of Johnson as a rival, but we thought of Gainesville as a rival, if you get my drift on that. So this is not a biased statement. Just City Park's a really cool stadium. Let's see. All right, so I've got breaking news on a Georgia thing I'll give you here in a moment, too. Not injury or anything like that, but this is one of those things, like, it always drives me crazy, like the Georgia media types. So like when something comes out, they kind of tweet out the as expected. This is a good chance to do an as expected tweet here, because the most obvious news in the world has become true. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Let me finish this thought before we get there. We did City Park in Gainesville, very cool old stadium. We did Barron Stadium up in Rome this past weekend, very cool old stadium. A lot of cool stuff has happened. We did Grady Stadium. That's not called Henderson Stadium now, so let me get the name right. Very cool old stadium. That's where Irk Russell cut his teeth as a young coach. So Henderson Stadium there in kind of the Midtown Piedmont Park region of Atlanta. Very cool old stadium. We're going to be at Marietta High School this Friday night. All of that to say this. We're going to be at Marietta High School, another one of these really cool old stadiums. They spent a bunch of money to renovate it, but it's a cool old stadium. It backs up into a neighborhood. A lot of folks from the neighborhood kind of come over and tailgate in some yards, and they peer through the fence to watch the game, almost like it's like an old Sandlot type thing or something. A very, very cool old ballpark. We're going to be there on Friday. All right, last thing, and we've got to go because it is obnoxiously late. So Saturday, September 25th, Georgia, Vanderbilt in Nashville, announced as a noon start. I think pretty much everybody already kind of knew this was going to be the case. So 11 a.m. local time for Georgia in Nashville against Vanderbilt. Of course, noon Eastern for everybody else here. And that is the story on all of that. So hope all of you have a great day. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check out the AJC as well, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Obviously, one of the big things online right now is, the disappointing performance of the Falcons yesterday. The Arthur Smith era does not get off to a glowing start. And listen, I could talk to you about this for a while, but I'm not going to. Just this team does not have a lot going for it right now, it doesn't seem. Arthur Smith may be a good coach, but, oh boy, some of the recent draft decisions for the Falcons are really kind of at the forefront right now. But nonetheless, so they lose yesterday to Philadelphia. Steve Hummer, good column on that. Braves, they'll get a win against the Marlins. Freddie Freeman hits his 30th home run. They make their continued push through the month of September here. So happier coverage on all of that. And also, a continued look at what's going on with the coronavirus there as well, and kind of, how our state's responding to all that, what it all means. It's obviously all a really important conversation. And there's some really interesting stuff. Obviously, different people have different feelings about how some of this is playing out. So you can follow all of that online at ajc.com and decide where you stand and what's the right decision for you and your family, and kind of how our state, moves forward with all of this. So important to do that. Atlanta Journal-Constitution gives you a chance to online, ajc.com. And, of course, when it comes to all the really fun sports stuff, Falcons loss, Braves win, and everything else in between. High school coverage there as well. Really good stuff. Valuable resource as you're getting ready for these games this week, throughout the weekend. Good high school coverage at ajc.com too. All right, thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You'll have a great day. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. By the way, check out R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Water heater goes out. In many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. Just find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.